Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Fireside chat with Bill Scott. We will be talking about ag tech in developing nations. As with all of our sessions, feel free to use the Ask Questions feature at the bottom for voting on questions. Today, we are joined by Bill Scott, a senior technical advisor at Dexis Consulting Group in DC. He is an agricultural economist and market development specialist with 35 years of experience in high-value agriculture market development and competitiveness projects both in the United States and internationally. He has worked in more than 40 countries on 5 continents, including specific and significant experience in Russia, Cape Verde, Morocco, Pakistan, Romania, Senegal, Mali, and Iraq. He recently led a team conducting a study of perishable agricultural logistics for horticulture, dairy, fish, and cereal products for the World Bank in Senegal. He's also served as project manager for an IFC-sponsored rice project focusing on marketing strategy and export expansion for the Cambodian Rice Federation. And he is an alumni of the California Agricultural Leadership Program and was recently awarded the program's Leader of the Year International Award for his work in international development. And he has a master's degree in agricultural economics from Stanford University and a degree in international relations from the Institute of Political Science in Paris, France. Bill, it is great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Great to be here, and it's a real honor to be in the company of such a wonderful group of talented and dedicated agricultural entrepreneurs. We are needed to feed 10 billion people by 2050. And thank you for the opportunity to talk. This is a fireside chat. If I say something too wrong, Tobin can hold my feet to the fire very easily.
Excellent. All right, let's dive in. So, first question: you've done an extensive amount of work in the U.S. and internationally, working with U.S.-based firms, international donors, foreign governments, foreign private sector firms. Knowing that each country is unique, can you walk us through what some of the big differences are between developed agricultural economies like the U.S. and developing economies worldwide?
Okay, well, dissertations have been written on that, but I'll try to do it in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to talk mostly about the U.S. for the developed side, with a few things about Europe thrown in. In the United States, we have farm and ranch families that comprise about 2% of the overall population. We have about 2 million farms. Some are very big, some are small, but we have all sorts of sizes of farms. From an economic point of view, farming or agriculture accounts for 1% of U.S. gross domestic product. The food sector as a whole accounts for 5.4% of the GDP in the United States. And agriculture and the food sector comprise 11% of U.S. employment. So the point to take from that, we've got 2% of the population as farmers, but 11% working in agriculture. That means that we have a lot of employment going on in the processing, marketing, and distribution sectors that make agriculture possible in the United States and gets the food to the people. It's interesting that 15% of every dollar goes to farmers, and the other 85 cents or percent goes to the farming, the food sector. Trade is very important in the United States. We export $140 billion worth, and we import $130 billion worth of food, 20% of our food supply. So trade is a very important part of what we do. We have open agriculture, both out and in. And remember, I said there were 2 million farms in the United States. There are 10.5 million farms in the European Union. So that means sort of more countries with smaller farms, but that gives you an idea. I would imagine the GDP calculations are about the same. Now, to look at agriculture in the developing world, the FAO statistic that is generally cited is that 60% of rural areas are in agriculture. With 570 million farms, many of those are less than 2 hectares. Of course, the informal sector is much larger in the developing world, and the incidence of bigger farms much smaller, but there certainly are some. And a recent study in Africa showed that farms were growing and able to absorb some of the agricultural technology things that are going on soon. So that's a real quick overview of farms in developed world and developing world.
Awesome. Okay. And kind of a follow-up to that, we were talking recently, and the Flora America story came up, which is a great story, and I think it kind of represents the trajectory that ag tech can have in terms of integrating developing nations and developed nations. So I guess could you just kind of quickly tell us the Flora America story, and then bring us to the present day, and kind of talk through what the next wave of ag tech is?
I'll give that as an example of something that was done. It was done 35 years ago. We were involved in the startup of a company called Flora America in Colombia, and it grew to be the largest cut flower farm or company in Latin America. And at that time, the idea was that flowers grown at the equator at altitude could be grown relatively cheaply because you didn't have to heat your greenhouse. So that was an innovation, and also labor was cheaper. So that idea went well. It took a while to get established, and now they send 747 planes full of flowers to both Europe, Alsmeer, and also to Miami in the United States, and that has come very well. This is not a small farmer play. We'll talk more about small farmer plays as we go forward.
Awesome. So I think that's a great example of historical impacts of ag tech. Can you talk about maybe something in the recent past, possibly the past 5 years, one of the ag tech innovations that has been the most impactful for developing nations?
Yes, well, I mean, I'm going to sort of have a little bit of a framework to talk about here. I mean, what is needed in agriculture? Good inputs, seeds, fertilizer, agricultural chemicals, solid markets, and credit to fuel all of that. Those are the three sort of primary things that are at work. And we have done a great deal in the agricultural sphere. I mean, 50 years ago, there were countries that weren't feeding themselves. And because we invested in agricultural education, because of the Green Revolution, which was mostly about inputs, most countries can feed themselves now. I mean, the places where we have famines are generally places which are at war and have their supply chains completely disrupted. So the areas in seed, in particular, have been extremely important. We have new seeds that are helping farmers keep up with the situation. There's an issue about climate change and how we deal with climate change, how we develop seeds that will help farmers in countries around the world with climate change. That's an issue. The GMO crowd had some problems politically and in the way they approached it. The CRISPR crowd, which is now genetic modification but more democratic, has got a lot of promise for those kinds of seeds. We have made important improvements in the way we reach farmers, and we'll talk some more about that. But the cell phone is allowing banks in Africa and Asia to reach out to a new group of farmers that they weren't able to reach before in any sort of economic way. And now people are doing some new things. I was really impressed by the DeHaat conversation yesterday. That's a great way of getting inputs, markets, and credit to small farmers, and I hope that will be replicated in many countries. Very impressed.
Yeah. To build on that and kind of talk about a specific example, you and I were chatting about a small pilot project in Mali that you did with Dexis Consulting Group focused on drip irrigation, which would be great to hear more about. So to kind of set the stage for us, can you tell us a little bit about the Malian context, maybe some of the primary agricultural products? What does the sector look like? What are the key challenges?
Okay, Mali is a relatively large country in center-west Africa. The northern part is in the desert. In the south, the Niger River runs through the country and provides a lot of water for their crops. In Sikasso in the south, they have enough rainfall further in the south to be able to grow maize and millet and vegetables. Along the Niger River, they grow rice, and they have made major investments in irrigation. We wanted to see if drip irrigation, which is an important technological advance, would work on rice. And so we worked with a rice processing company and Netafim, which is one of the big irrigation companies. There are a lot of irrigation companies: Jane Irrigation, Toro, Rainbird, Valmont. So this is not an advertisement necessarily for Netafim, but they were the ones that got involved in this. And Netafim provided irrigation equipment. Sopro Trilad set up an irrigated rice perimeter, and they grew rice. There were a lot of startup problems, but and the yields were in the 5 to 6 metric ton per hectare range, which is good and about what they get on the irrigated perimeters on the Niger River, probably to pay for or amortize the cost of drip irrigation. We need to get up to 8 or 9 tons per hectare of rice. So that will be a challenge and something to look forward to. But it's clear that in Niger, basically, the Niger River is getting less and less water in it due to climate change. So they are going to have to be ready to deal with that fact. And drip irrigation is certainly one way to do that. Drip irrigation was also very good for high-value crops, fruits and vegetables. And in our model, we proposed that they ought to do a crop of rice and then a crop of onions, which were high value, and that would more or less amortize the cost of the drip irrigation.
Awesome. And so can you tell us a little bit about why this is so impactful for Mali and what scaling up this pilot could accomplish?
Well, again, they're going to have to deal with the fact that there's going to be less and less water in the Niger River. Their population is consuming more and more rice, and they're far from the ocean, so it's expensive to bring rice in from Thailand or other places. And in fact, if they grew more rice, they're able to. They grow about 90% of their rice now and import 10%. If they grew more rice, they could be a regional exporter, and that would be very valuable for a place like Mali. So it's got economic ramifications. It's got trade ramifications, and also it can be economically advantageous to grow it for these high value crops.
Awesome. Okay, I want to switch gears real quick because you also mentioned in our last conversation an interesting project in Central Asia that you were preparing for, specifically in Uzbekistan, that was focused on using satellite imagery and machine learning to provide useful information to farmers that was digestible, actionable, and affordable, kind of all on a daily basis. So can you just tell us a little bit about the ag sector in Uzbekistan and what this project's going to do?
We work with Farmers National, which is the largest crop or agricultural consulting entity in the Midwest of the United States. And they told us about a group called Farmers Edge, which is a Canadian company. And what Farmers Edge has done is they have gotten a system together. It's a system of software and of satellite photos. And missing from many of the satellite companies for the last 20 years has been the ability to translate the satellite pictures into usable data for the farmers. And what they have now is a great system where they have satellite photos, and then they take those satellite photos and then they use their software to translate that into something for the farmer, and they send out an email saying, here's what you need to do now. This part of the field needs some more fertilizer. This part needs some more pesticide. And they are doing this in farms all over the Midwest of the United States. of Canada. They are in Ukraine. They are using Russian software to develop for that market their programming. And it's just a very interesting company. We're thinking about using it on a 50,000 hectare cotton farm in Uzbekistan to try to make that more sustainable operation, which in the past has really been a problem.
Awesome. I think yesterday we had a great pitch from Cloud Agronomics that is providing a service that's similar, I think specifically for corn. So it's good to see these technologies are being used.
Right. The key though is to get it so that it's useful for the farmer. You know, they're not going to put a satellite analysis person on their staff. It needs to be the farmer who can say, this is what I have to do. I got to put more water on it, more fertilizer. I got to do this. And they've got agronomists working on staff, and they're really coming up with a very practical model. Again, not really a small farmer play, but it's certainly useful, and these larger farms are being able to optimize their production this way.
Awesome. Is this a solution that you think can be used elsewhere, or is it geographically dependent or crop dependent?
No, it's not. Well, it's not geographically dependent. I mean, it would work. I mean, this is probably going to work more on the grains rather than the high value horticultural types of things. But I mean, there are a lot of areas that grow a lot of grain, and it's nice to have a satellite look at that whole area. It's hard to get in there as a farmer and see what you need to see. As long as you take that satellite image and analyze it and tell the farmer what they need to do to get higher yields.
Yeah, awesome. I'd like to kind of turn to big picture trends. So we've talked a little bit about historical ag tech trends and some current projects. So, for example, in Mexico and Latin America, it was packing sheds and cold storage over the past several decades that was the requirement for breaking into the U.S. market. Right. And small businesses were really key for establishing these supply chains, producing quality products in produce, rice, other commodities. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of what the next big trend is for ag tech, either for integrating between developed and developing economies or otherwise.
Right. Well, I mean, the packing sheds and the supply chain continue to remain very important. Groups that integrate those things like the HOT are very important. And that was really the breakthrough for Mexican agriculture, was to improve their quality, have the cold storage, and have cold transportation to get into the U.S. market. And that's true for every place that's trying to trade or even within the countries. There are a couple of other areas that I think are very promising. The digital revolution on smartphones is going to make it much more possible, as I've already said, for banks to reach out to new clients in remote areas. Now, it's not going to be just as simple as a farmer starting to get a bank account. There needs to be some support, and that's where a group like Dahad or some other companies like in Nigeria that I've met are busy signing up farmers for credit. They're getting the GPS coordinates of the farm. They're helping them get the credit and the inputs from input suppliers, and helping them find markets. And again, that's where I like the HOT model a lot, and that can be replicated. A lot of times, big companies processors need to help out in that and do what's called triangular credit, which is something we use in California too for small farmers. The big companies, the banks lend either money or input supply to the small farmers. The small farmers sell to the processor. The processor pays the input supplier back, and then sends the money back to the farmer of what they have made. And that is all very possible in Africa and India, thanks to the smartphone. So that's something that really needs to be used. There was another company in Zambia that used blockchain to be able to get the sorghum from small suppliers, They used it to brew beer, and then they sent back the payments to the farmers via blockchain, either on their smartphones or on their regular phones. So that was a very good use. And I mean, getting the GPS coordinates of farms is also really great because you can do all sorts of things. You can send drones over those areas to see whether what's growing, estimate how much production you're going to have to process, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of things that you can do with the smartphones. In addition, you can use smartphones for extension. You can do extension work with small farmers, telling them how to grow things. I was at an IFC conference in Amsterdam a year and a half ago, and there was an Indian company that is doing great things. They were, you could take a picture of your plant if it was having a problem, send it into the company, and then they would analyze what the problem was and tell you what you needed to do. It was a subscription service, and that was really good. You could also use your smartphone to get nutrition information out to women's groups and others that are out, far away from the capital, and that would be very, very useful. Mechanization is another area. It's interesting. I was talking to a banker in Nigeria the other day, and he said, I said, what do you need to do for fight against COVID? He says, we need to get loans for mechanization services out there because everybody's locked down. There aren't as many people planting. We're going to have much less food. And if we could get mechanized services out there, we could plant more. So that's certainly something. And there are there's a group called Hello Tractor that does work. And they sort of like are the Uber of the tractor world. And you can call up and get your tractor services on your smartphone. So that's interesting.
Very cool. Kind of on this point, we've got a question that just popped up from the audience. So with regards to Mexico, the farmers geared towards exportation have benefited from ag tech innovations, but smallholders, which is the majority of the ag sector, smallholders remain very disconnected and inefficient. So the question is, how can we democratize access to ag tech?
Well, I think the key is improved seeds and better fertilizers and better agrochemicals for the farmers, and also better practices, more sustainable practices. You don't have to be using a bunch of ag chemicals if you've got cover crops and you're composting and doing other things. So number one, if you can get ag credit to those smaller farmers in Africa, in Mexico, through your smartphone, then they're going to be able to get a hold of those improved inputs, and that's going to help them increase their productivity and increase their profitability. So that would be my answer to that question. It's again, it's important to do some ag services with them to help them get their bank accounts. And if you can do that, then you really will have gotten a service.
Awesome. Another question, you just touched upon COVID with your mention of the banker. So COVID has definitely highlighted gaps in our agricultural system in the U.S. and worldwide. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the impact of COVID in the short and long term for developing nations.
Yeah, though that's a tough one. I've been reading about this. I mean, they're very worried. In general, FAO is very worried about short supply of food over the next 2 years for two reasons. One is people are planting less because they're locked down, and two, supply chains internationally are interrupted, and they're having trouble even getting in inputs from things. I think we just have to keep trying to keep those supply chains going and try to figure out ways to help farmers get their fields planted and harvested. I won't start talking about immigration in the United States.
That's fair. All right, that sounds good. And kind of last question before we kind of leave some room for Q&A. Who are the drivers of all of these innovations? You've talked about people from a variety of countries who are under different circumstances. So I guess I'm curious, who's driving the scale of ag tech in Is it entrepreneurs adapting their technology? Is it foreign investment? Is it in-country private sector firms or venture capital investors? Who's really driving this?
Well, I don't know who'd be number one. I mean, it's really all of the above. I mean, we need innovation in the agricultural sector to be a more sustainable sector. You know, things that we can do to use fewer resources and in a better way are really very necessary, and that's going to come from ag innovation. The big issue every time I talk to agripreneurs is how to get to the market. And all I would say is you need farmers on your board. You need to be really practical in your reaching out to farmers in the way they use it, and it has to be simple to use. And if you can do that, you can get to where you need to go. Plus education, and that's both a combination of private companies doing education and governments and educational systems teaching sustainability. You know, sustainability is a big, now in University of California is a big deal. Students are getting degrees in sustainability and learning how, and it's very important. So we just have so much more to do, and we got to keep doing it.
Awesome. Okay, that sounds good. In the last minute or two, and I see we're a little bit behind schedule, just in general. So I'll give a quick sec for any other questions that pop up, and otherwise we can save the remaining 2 minutes and get the overall summit back on schedule. I don't see anything popping up. So, Bill, this was excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. It was great to hear your insights on ag tech and developing nations. And so, on behalf of Tuck, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If we'd been doing this with social distancing and 900 people, our line would have been 2 kilometers long.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Awesome. And to the audience, up next, we've got a great panel focused on ag tech investing in Latin America. So stick around and we'll see you in that panel. Thanks, everybody.